Recently, I've started running a new Dungeons & Dragons campaign within the Eberron campaign setting. This setting is famous for a lot of things. You have the Warforged, the Dragon Marks, the Artificers, the Last War, just a bunch of general things. However, I want to point one of those topics that I just said specifically in particular, I'm going to focus on today's video. And you already know what it is. I've already said it in the title. I do not like how the 2014 and an extension 2024 version of the Artificer works. Actually, I can't say that because Eberron Forge of the Artificer has been delayed until December 9th, apparently. Which means maybe by the time, starting next year, January, maybe this entire video will be irrelevant because they're going to completely rework the Artificer. However, I'm going to go off the Artificer that is in this book. It's also in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but I'm just going to be using the version in this book. And yes, before you guys say it, yes, I know the Armorer subclass is official to that book, or originates, and then there's also like some sort of cartographer class that they released, and some kind of Frankenstein-esque class that they released into Unearthed Arcana. However, just because I'm playing in the Eberron campaign setting, and as you can see, I own this book, I'm just going to be doing the version of the Artificer out of this book. So, let's get started. Alright, this one is going to be sort of a 50-50. I've heard some people complain about this. I've heard other people actually quite like it. Why is the Artificer class a spellcaster? Genuinely answer the question. Put it down in the comments. Why do you think the Artificer class is a spellcaster, or at least a half-caster? Because in this book, Eberron Arising from the Last War, it says that you are supposed to reflavor your spellcasting as if you were using gadgets. And yes, I understand. Reflavoring in Dungeons & Dragons happens all the time. For geek's sake, I have an entire video on this channel on how warlocks don't need patrons and clerics don't need gods. You can use the class abilities from a specific class without, necessarily sticking to the flavor 100%. However, whenever it comes to the Artificer, it's kind of hard to reflavor some of these spells. For example, the spell Invisibility. How are you supposed to make a gadget that makes yourself invisible? These are supposed to be low-powered magic items that you are using to replace your spells. Some other spells, such as like Firebolt or Ray of Frost, can easily be explained, but then whenever you're looking at like spells such as Rope Trick or Protection from Poison, unless you're making directly an antidote, which is a different subclass, or well, is a completely subclass in general for this class, it's kind of hard to make inventions and micro-gadgets for those. The Artificer in D&D is supposed to be the class that makes magic items. That's what a lot of people are drawn to, and that's why they were put in the Eberron, campaign setting guide. That's why Keith Baker made the class. It's because it is an extremely magically enhanced world, and so they wanted to make a class that makes magic items. However, for a class that makes magic items, you're not really making your own magic items. You're instead just recycling, sort of classic magic items from the Dungeon Master's Guide or from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and then just sort of using them. I would have really liked it if there was some kind of point system, or if the book just straightly told you, hey, talk with your game master and perhaps maybe you can make your own magic item. I think they could have done something very similar to a sorcerer's meta magic, where perhaps you have an amount of points per day that you can use to change the effect of your magic items. Perhaps maybe one of those could be, changing the damage type that a magical weapon does. So all of a sudden your Flamestone Longsword that you've created now is a Frost Tongue Longsword, allowing you to do cold damage or acid damage. Or perhaps, maybe you could have a, let's call it infusion manipulation that allows you to give your magic item an additional charge each day. Not only would this make it so this class is focused on making magic items, however, it would also make it so you can use these magic items more effectively and differently than the average person. Let's be honest, if you're playing mid and high level D&D, every character in your party should have magic items. So, it's sort of bad whenever the fighter has the same amount of magic items as the Artificer. Another thing I want to point out in this is that in the section replacing a magic item right above the magic item, recommendations, it says directly that you cannot use the replace an item feature to create a potion, which is kind of ironic, And the way how they got around this with the Alchemist class is by calling them concoctions, which brings me to our next. The Alchemist subclass for the Artificer could be and should be its own class. I know I bring it up a lot in this channel, but Pathfinder actually does a really good job of this concept. They don't have one Artificer class. Well, that's self-explanatory because they don't have the Eberron setting, but they actually have two Artificer classes. The first one, the one that we're not really talking about, is the Inventor. They create firearms or a robot or something like that. Basically, if you've ever seen Star Wars Episode 1, Anakin Skywalker is an inventor. He invented C-3PO, he made his own pod racer, he did all this stuff. But we're getting off track. The one that we actually want to focus on is the Alchemist. Who would have thought the class that shares the same name as the concept that we're talking about would be the one that we're talking about? Wow, that blew my mind. The entire point of the Pathfinder Alchemist class is to create alchemical items, something that they keep separately from magical items in their player cores. In my opinion, and in my experience, ignore the voice crack there, a lot of game masters, even in D&D, even if it isn't an official rule, will keep alchemical items as its own separate category of magic items. I know for myself personally, a lot of the towns or cities I will make for my D&D games, especially my Eberron campaigns, will have some sort of alchemy shop where magic items are not sold. Which sort of brings me back to my point. The only reason why the Alchemist subclass exists is because Wizards of the Coast doesn't separate potions from magic items. They still consider them magic items. Whenever you are playing an Artificer, it is assumed for the balance of the class that you will be using your own magic items. To support this features, we have certain Artificer class features like Magic Item Adept that allows you to attune to more magic items at once. The normal Dungeons & Dragons character can only attune to 3, when I believe a 20th level Artificer can attune to 5 at once. However, every single Artificer player I've ever played with has always given out their magic items to just different party members. Now, this might just be a personal, topic or personal experience that I've seen, but I've heard a lot of common sentiments from, other players. I've heard players say that, our party got mad when our Artificer refused to let us use some of their magic items. So why are we still supporting this class that is just innately broken? Maybe if you were to, make a difference in system where the Artificer has specific higher power magic items that they can only use, or pretty much these magic items that they can only use would pretty much make it so when everyone else or whenever another party member touches it or an enemy touches it, it just loses all of its magical properties, and then you can have these magic items that you can give out to other players. Maybe like a wizard spellbook, you would be able to, lock these magic items to yourself. Like, maybe for you to use this +1 longsword, the item would have to detect your presence or something like that. That way, if your paladin or fighter or ranger or rogue or whatever tries to pick it up, it would just lose its properties. It would just become a normal longsword. Alright, my fifth and final reason why I think the Artificer is kind of odd is that their subclasses are fairly limiting. And there's not actively new subclasses being released for the Artificer. Yes, I know that there was like a spooky Undead Frankenstein style one released for the Unearthed Arcana, and there was also possibly a map making one. However, as of right now, we only have the Armorer, which turns you into Iron Man, the Alchemist that, like I said, could be its own class, the Artillerist, sorry, I can't pronounce that pretty much just gives you a tank, and the Battlesmith that is pretty much just your average everyday spellcaster / martial style character, which pretty much turns your Artificer into a Gith. These archetypes are fairly limiting, at least with something like the Sorcerer that also has, limiting archetypes. You could also reflavor it. For example, a Storm Sorcerer could easily turn into a Sailor, a A Draconic Sorcerer could easily be using Yanti magic instead of dragons, but at least with these ones, it just makes it really hard to reflavor. There's an entire Jenny D video about why the Artificers don't have to be steampunk and why their stuff doesn't have to be made out of metal. But when your entire setting is Eberron, the setting where airships are common and robotic people just walk around in normal cities, and where Sharn, the City of Towers, is so tall that it is, shown as in length instead of width, yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable that your Artificer would be steampunk themed, or at least aetherpunk themed, or whatever you want to call it. Hey y'all, just a little post-video wrap-up here. I just want to say that even though I gave the Artificer a lot of crap in this video, I really love the Artificer as a class, and I love the ideas that it's trying to prove, and trying to use. I just think that it can be redone a little bit better. Maybe at some point I'll go off and try to make my own Artificer subclass. Oh wait, it's not covered by the SRD. Well, never mind, I can't do that. But like I was saying, even though I gave the Artificer a lot of crap in this video, I still really like how it works, and I still really like how it functions. But I just think that it needs some changes, which is why I homebrew the Artificer in my home games. I don't think that Artificers exactly belong in a setting like the Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft. However, for the setting that they were created for, Eberron, it honestly works pretty well. And before you say it all, yes, I know that there is a description in this book, in the Artificer class description, saying how you can import the Artificer into other settings. I personally just wouldn't allow the Artificer in other settings. But hey, let's try something new. I'm going to put here in a second a question for you all to answer, and I want you all to answer it down in the comment section. Alright, thank you for watching. Bye.